So here I am. Let's do this.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much for coming. I just want to do a brief introduction, and we're trying to keep this very low key, very low stress, since everybody has enough stress, including people who are breaking their iPads, obviously. I just want to note that this Visiting Filmmakers series online is in place throughout April. We have multiple people coming in each week, and we are very grateful and very fortunate to have a wide variety of people who are going to show up and chat with us, have conversations with us, and take questions from everybody who wants to ask one. And we're hoping that this is one way of helping to sort of create or offer a sense of community and connectedness, right, when all of this is going on. And we appreciate everybody who's attending, as well as our guests. So thank you very much, Doug. I'm just going to say, because I need to, I'm going to say who's sponsoring this Visiting Filmmaker series online, and I have to read it because it's a long list. The series has previously always brought filmmakers to campus, and Doug was going to be one of those people. And with the help of many different programs and individuals over the years, we've been doing it for about 20 years. This online incarnation is sponsored by Film and Video Studies, the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, the College of Visual and Performing Arts, the English Department, the School of Art, Global Affairs and Global Programs, the Criticos series, Arts and Context, University Libraries, Film and Media Studies, the Interdisciplinary Curriculum Committee, History and Art History, University Life, and Women and Gender Studies. So we thank all of those folks for helping to make this possible. I'll say a couple words about Doug. I rather have him talk about himself because he's because you can see why he's so charismatic. He was born in Washington, D.C., currently under Washington, D.C. under lockdown, and grew up in Hyattsville, Maryland. He's worked on TV and films and stage as a writer, actor, and director, among other things. And I just learned today that he started directing at age 16. You're a prodigy. He starred in a number of stage performances as well as films, and I just want to note a couple of them. One, Cradle to the Grave with Jet Li and DMX. Big DMX fan, so
Really?
yes, I appreciated
I have a great
that.
story about that if you want to hear it.
I definitely want to hear it. And Any Day Now with Alan Cumming and Francis Fisher. On television, he's certainly most famous for starring as Professor Chance Counter in Noah's Ark on Logo. And he also has appeared on TV shows including Star Trek Voyager, The Drew Carey Show, The Hughleys, Charmed, Gideon's Crossing, Mad TV, Girlfriends, and a lesser known show that I actually quite love named Profiler.
Oh, yeah.
Big Ali Walker fan as well. He's been a writer, producer, director, and creative director at a number of television stations. I'm going to let that sort of appear on the website that you can check it out. And in 2006, he created a television and film development and production company called the Ogden Group Entertainment. That year, he produced and directed his first documentary on the life of Aretha Franklin, called Aretha, appropriately. He has since written and directed the feature films Hot Guys with Guns, 2013, and From Zero to Love last year. And that is currently, is that online available for pay?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
actually From Zero to I Love You.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And that's all
I
right.
read it wrong.
That's all right. And it's you could find it right now on the Deco site through Amazon Prime.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
And there's a 30-day free trial of Deco. I just did it last night to watch the movie.
Okay, and then I'm just going to note again briefly that Doug has won many awards, including a leadership awards from the Human Rights Campaign, the Connie Norman Award from CSW for outstanding achievement in fostering racial, ethnic, religious, and gender unity within the LGBT community, the Advocacy Award from the United Teachers Association, and an Image Award from the Jordan Rustin Coalition in Los Angeles, which is a wide variety. He does a wide variety of things, and that's a wide variety of awards too. With that, I'm going to maybe ask Lisa if she wants to open up the questions. And we're certainly welcoming questions from all of you. you have options on that. If you go to your name on the participants list, you can see there is a little hand raising icon next to the video icon. You can certainly do that and we will notice you. Or you can write in the chat. And the chat is possible if you go along the bottom of the frame that you're looking at now in that little bubble that looks like a cartoon talking thing. And then you can chat there. So ask your questions however you want, and I'll let Lisa start us off now. Thank you.
So first of all, thank you. And for those of you who don't know, Doug and I have known each other for years now. I don't even know how many years in Los Angeles. And I will also say that many of my Film Lab students are on here as well. Doug was going to be our writer-director for the Film Lab this semester, and voila, Corona, and now we can't shoot. So we're still thrilled to have Doug here, and Doug has been really great with my Film Lab students, and so please ask questions. In my opinion, I think one of the greatest bits of information that we could probably get from Doug here is what it looks like to be a director and an actor, because Doug has done both sides of that line there. And I know there's a lot of talk, especially in film school, about how to talk to actors. And so I think you're in a really wonderfully unique position to be able to give us some great detail. So I guess my first question would just be a broad open one, which is, how do you approach directing? And obviously you're coming into it with acting, so you may not be able to parse those two apart, but I will let you explain.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa, and thank you, Cynthia, for having me. I really, really appreciate this. So I started directing, like Cynthia said, when I was 16. I did a play in high school. I directed Butterflies Are Free, which was actually the very first thing I ever directed. And I just back up and say this: my parents did not want me to be an actor at all, and and I knew from the time I was 7 that that's what I wanted to do, but nobody was behind the idea. That they wanted me to be secure. They wanted me to be some kind of GS. And for those of you who work and live in Washington, you understand that a GS is some kind of government employee, and they wanted me to be secure. So they wouldn't let me study theater. They wouldn't let me take acting as my major in college, and I went to Indiana University. So I tricked them, and I took television production and direction and theater performance and direction, and minored in art history. And all of my classes, even in high school, we were encouraged to look beyond the scope of acting. Acting is hugely important. It's the head of the spear in a production, right? So we had to learn how to. I mean, I was given an education that said I had to learn how to build sets, and I had to be a costumer. I had to, like, learning how to sew was not fun. I had to run props and work as a stagehand, work as a prompter, work as a dramaturge. And when um, when you come up with an acting vocabulary, there's a certain way that actors talk, and that we are trained to understand and break down a script. And the older I got and the more my career advanced, and I started as I went from stage to then TV and film, I started working with a lot of directors who had been either camera people or DPs, cinematographers, or art directors. And very few directors that I've worked with in LA had the same kind of experience or the same kind of vocabulary. So I found it incredibly easy to talk to actors because I'd been an actor, because I'd been raised with that vocabulary. And then I started studying with a guy named Milton Katsalis, who was a fantastic director. And he was definitely an actor's director, and because he was also an acting teacher, so he knew how to talk to them. And I noticed that a lot of times in class, there were people taking class who were actually directors because they wanted to learn the sort of secret language of actors. Because there was nothing harder for an actor who's got to get inside. I mean, there are two ways of acting. There's the American school is from the inside out, and then there's sort of the European school, which is from the outside in. And I like to think of myself as a little bit of both. If I put on the costume, if I'm sitting in the right position, then my voice is, if I lean my head to the left or the right or something, it's going to change the way my voice is. It's going to call up different emotions. And as a director who is an actor, I know how to get to a person, to get them to, I try to find out what it is about them and what's that particular lot, because every actor is kind of like a patient, and a doctor is like a director, and you have to learn to be specific to that particular patient as opposed to just treating everybody the same way, which is what a lot of directors do. They're like, well, make it faster, or you'll get things like, did you make it faster? Or worse is a director who doesn't know how to talk at all, doesn't have an emotional vocabulary of their own. And so in order to talk to somebody who is working from an emotional place, you have to learn how to speak actor. You have to learn how to speak director. And I've worked with one of the best directors, probably the best director I ever worked with was a woman named Doris Roberts, who was Ray Romano's mother on Everybody Loves Raymond.
Yeah.
In fact, Doris and I were working on I was doing a play for Doris when she got that role, when it was going through pilot season. And I remember opening night is when the show got picked up. So Doris could set you free, you know what I mean? As opposed to putting you in a box of like sort of limitations. And a lot of times, if you're not a writer, and if you're not an actor, and if you come to directing from sort of a kind of remove, where you know what the picture is, but you don't know how to get the people to move in the picture, it's really difficult for those people who are trying to translate what it is that you want to see. So learning to act and learning to speak actor is incredibly vital. One of the things that I try to do is hire the best actors and then not have to direct. There was what is the name? The director that directed Bonnie and Clyde. Why am I blanking on his name? Lisa, do you remember?
Google it.
Okay, Google it. So I was listening to him talk about the performance he got out of Faye Dunaway and Warren Beatty, and he said, hire better, direct less. And that's what I try to do, is I try to get out of the actor's way as opposed to giving them too much direction and loading them up too much.
Arthur Penn.
Arthur Penn. That is one of the best things. I mean, I'm the kind of guy that looks for little sayings to hang my hat on. It's like Arthur Penn saying, hire better, direct less. My other favorite one is Francis Ford Coppola saying movies are written on the hoods of cars, because you get to a set, like like how many times have you location scouted and then you come back a week later and suddenly the building that was there is being torn down that day, or that when you shoot in LA, invariably, if you go to shoot outside, that will be the day that the neighbor's lawn guy is there. And once during my first feature, I had a situation where we were shooting outdoors, and I borrowed this mansion from a friend of mine, and the house across the street was having a cement truck delivery. Oh, wow. And it was the one day we were outside, and they were delivering literally right across the cul-de-sac. It was, so you have to be on your feet all the time.
So what'd you do?
Slipped that guy $50 to turn off the truck for an hour till I got the scene done. I mean, I paid gardeners. I have begged and pleaded with construction workers. I have, invited people to lunch on the set. Whatever you have to do, you got to do. You know what I mean? But I'm really glad that I have a really well-rounded experience coming up. When the first actual film I ever worked on out of college was a show. It was a movie that was shot in like 1985 in Washington, D.C., called Good to Go. And it's about go-go music in D.C. in the 80s. And I was a standby props guy. And the producer, good Lord, what was I? I was like 22. And I got hired to do props and sets. And the producer was 24, and his name is Sean Hepburn Farrar. He's Audrey Hepburn and Mel Farrar's son.
Oh.
And we were shooting in an abandoned building, and it was raining, and they needed to prop up the floor for the first floor. And he said, "Well, you need to get a hydraulic lift in here, and you need to prop." And I'm like, "I don't know what that is." And what was really great, he's like, "Don't make excuses. Never ever come to the director with an excuse. Just get it done." So I went and talked to the construction guys, and they built a floor, something that'll hold the floor up. But I got to do every job. You know what I mean? I got to like I said, sets, costumes, wardrobe. I've done makeup. Do you know what I mean? Like I've had to learn how to do all these things, and in the same time, be focused enough that when it was time for me to work with the actors, that I could just key in and be where they were emotionally.
So I watched From Zero to I Love You last night and loved it. I really was especially enjoyed the dialogue. And you had a lot of people kind of like talking a little bit overlapping and stuff like that. And it really worked so well. It was kind of humorous and it almost had a rhythm to it. It was really beautiful. Do you think about dialogue rhythmically?
Yeah, I think about dialogue like music, in particular, like jazz or classical music, or sometimes it's pop music. But I use, one of the things that as an actor that can be a little frustrating, and some actors don't like line readings from a director because a director will have a sound in his head or her head about what it's supposed to sound like, and you're not giving it to them. And years ago, when I was on Noah's Ark, Patrick Ian Polk was directing, and Patrick and I couldn't necessarily communicate, and I wasn't giving him what he wanted. And I said, just sing it to me. Just make the sound that you want, and I will copy that sound. And it's a lot of times it's just like, there's nothing wrong with like if you went to a vocal coach or you were working on a musical or something, you would have like the music director would literally sing it to you. You know what I mean? So that you know where the breaths are and things like that. And I pay attention to that. So I try to write so that when you pick up the script exactly how it's supposed to sound. Like I'm not one of those directors or acting teachers that says take all the punctuation out. In fact, that makes me so angry because as a writer and as a writer who knows what the hell I'm doing, I put that in there. Like if a comma is in a sentence, it means take a breath. And if you take a breath in the middle of a line, you can add intention to it. Do you know what I mean? Just like I did. Like there's a whole lot of meaning that goes into putting periods behind words and commas and things like that. There are certain things you don't put in. Like nobody needs a semicolon in a line of dialogue. But you know what I mean? Like you have to be able and willing to do that. So I make playlists a lot for the writing that I do and for the movie because I need to see it. I'm a visual and I'm an oral person, and I'm a classic eavesdropper. So I like to try to get people to not just talk, but to speak in a way that works with them. And sometimes we talk over each other. I try to cover that as much as I can in a two shot, so it makes sense. But sometimes it's called an L cut, where you start cutting the picture in and while the other dialogue is still playing. So
Yeah,
I'll
I
do that on
noticed those
purpose a
too.
lot because I want it to have a certain tempo and a certain rhythm. And that's the beauty of editing things as opposed to like just being trapped in a stage performance. But you have to understand that you're giving these people I want to give the actor every tool I possibly can to to make it work. Do you know what I mean? And I love movies. I learn a lot from watching movies. I learn a lot from the commentary. But one of my favorite movies, believe it or not, and this is where I literally learned how to write dialogue. There's a scene in the movie Amadeus, that was like Best Picture 1986 or something. And in it, Mozart is talking about the the music that he wrote for The Marriage of Figaro, and it starts off as a he says it starts off as a solo, and then it becomes a duet, and then it's a trio, then it becomes a quartet, and it becomes an octet. And I look at stuff like that, and I looked at that. I went, that's the perfect way to figure out both a shot and also, like you can take a shot, but you can also take dialogue and turn something that was originally just a monologue and then make it, and then just keep adding the voices to it, and then you build a harmony. So I do think about music, and I also think about it in terms of creating a shot like that. There's a really great movie that Laurence Olivier did that gets really undervalued, and it is with Marilyn Monroe, and it's called The Prince and the Showgirl. And there's a shot the morning after they spend the night together that starts off as a two shot of Marilyn Monroe in a bedroom, and the camera continues to pull back, and the single becomes a two shot, becomes a three shot, becomes a five shot, and then it just keeps pulling back, and like she just walks forward, and like the camera keeps pulling back, and then more people are revealed in the frame, and then they do the whole big scene, and then she walks back where she went to, and then the shot becomes a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and a single. And like I look at stuff like that and realize that I can do the same thing with dialogue. I can build harmony just as I would.
You did, and it worked really well. And even though you had that layering and texturing and L cuts, it worked. You could still hear all the dialogue, and the rhythm and texture was there. It was great.
Yeah, we worked really hard on that, not losing things. And there's a scene that happens in an art gallery where four characters come together. That's probably one of the most important, like, breath holding scenes in the whole movie. And when we were shooting it, we were shooting in an art gallery. Literally, I had to rehang, because the movie takes place over a couple of years, and you see the gallery like 4 or 5 times. I literally had to have 5 whole galleries worth of art to rehang in a day. I had 5 shows to hang in a day, and then shoot, and like had to rehang the whole gallery. And we got to the very last. Yeah, well, you got to do what you do. And luckily, I had friends who have a lot of art, and I have a lot of friends who are painters. So I'm like, and photographers, I need all of your work. And the last scene we were shooting in, and that the really cruxy, most important thing, we had a cricket. We had a cricket that we couldn't find. We chased him down, and whenever we were working, the cricket would stop. But as soon as we started rolling, the cricket would start. Like I would say action, and the cricket would be like, "Oh, is that my cue?" And like start its little legs together. And in order to make it work, the tricks that we had to do in order to get the dialogue to work was like we had to record it, and then I had to literally take it from different scenes. Like you'll see the audio from one scene and the picture from, and I just slid it into people's mouths, which is something that I learned to do.
About that, I wondered how much of that you had to do some ADR on and play with that.
Well, there were a couple scenes. Well, like we had to do scenes where like Scott wore a series of silk ties, and we had like 4 different sound guys on the film, and the first guy just could not manage to not pick up the silk on Scott's mic, which is a lot, which happens a lot. I mean, like you'll hear it a lot in different, especially in period pieces, where people are wearing silk a lot or like layers of clothes. And I literally had to take dialogue from different places and replace it, which is, just something you got to do. Like I said, movies are written on hoods of cars. Sometimes you can't get away from the fact that there is an active construction site, but what you can do is shoot the scene and then go back and ADR it and just do automatic dialogue replacement. It's not my favorite thing to do, but I'll do it.
Yeah.
Or just figure out a trick around it.
It worked well. So Professor Jusu's directing students are probably in here as well. And that's kind of one of the first classes at Mason that's really giving them the opportunity to direct and kind of figure all this out. What are kind of the initial baby steps into directing that now in hindsight you think are really essential?
Well, I'll tell you 2 things, a couple things. And first of all, and people are like, I see people lobbing questions up in the chat, and I'm not ignoring you. I will. Hopefully, we will get to you. But let me just answer Lisa's question first. So, one of the things that I learned is that you have to prepare yourself for the unknown. It's like your job as a director is to answer basically 900 questions a day. You know what I mean? And I've become very good at like, and people will do this thing where they come to you and like two or three people will try to ask you a question at the same time. So I've gotten like I've become a really good sort of hand traffic cop. Like, wait, I can only do one thing at a time. So you first, and you have to learn how to prioritize things. Like, who's on fire right now, and what do you need to do? When I directed something like 2,000 commercials before I directed my first feature. So I had a career in the advertising promotion department of pretty much every major television network, and working with movie stars and cutting down TV shows and movies to make trailers and commercials out of. So I had experience, but directing a film is like directing a commercial every day for 2 months. You know what I mean? It's like I had skill sets. So I knew how to act, I knew how to talk to actors, and I was used to making a mise en scène and all that stuff. But there were things that I did not know about film, so I took 10 different film directors out for coffee and or lunch, and I took a notebook and I said, what went right, what went wrong, and what did nobody tell you, and what do I need to know? So there were little things, like one of my friends, Travis Fine, who directed Any Day Now that I was in, said, never wear your headsets when you're not rolling, because the actors' mics are sometimes live, and you will hear really awful things. And like, so take your head, because he heard an actor say something on the film, and it put him he had to go to the men's room and sit in the corner in a fetal position and cry, because he had, put like $250,000 of his own money up in his mother's, and like the actors were talking smack. You know what I mean? And like, if it can go wrong, it will go wrong. I think talking to directors, really know you've got to be prepared. Got to be prepared. Like, there's nothing worse than having a crew wait for a director who doesn't know what he wants. Like, I always go and I previs everything. Like, I have to go and I have to walk the set by myself, because sometimes, especially when you're working with low budget stuff, you don't have a lot of time to rehearse in the space. But if I don't take some time to go into the space by myself and walk it around, and I have apps on both my phone and on my iPad that I use a lot, and I highly recommend the Panavision app for both phone and iPad, which will let you frame it up depending on, like, you can actually change the focal length on lenses, and you can like take pictures, and then you can go back and like, this is the angle that I want, this is how I want it to look. And there's also a great one called Sunscope that I really like, because there's nothing worse than like getting through your day and realizing that the time of day that you scouted is not the time of day that you're shooting. So I have this app on my phone that shows me where the sun is at any point in the day. And so I can then know, well, do I want to use this light coming from the window that's bouncing off the white of the house, or do we need to light it? You know what I mean? So I like to know I like to rehearse with the actors. Um, rehearse, especially if you don't have any money, because you cannot wait for them to find it on the set. They have to come locked and loaded, which is actually how you shoot TV. Like, when you're an actor or a director on a television series, you don't get multiple takes. You get 2 or 3 takes, and then you're moving on, because you got to make the day. You know what I mean? And shooting a TV show, a 1-hour show was shot over 8 days. It's like shooting a feature film in 8 days. So everybody has to know their stuff, and you above everybody else. I'll tell you the story about Vincent Minnelli when he was directing Picnic. And he was an amazing director. His movies are unbelievably beautiful, but he wasn't always the easiest guy to make up his mind. And Picnic was one of the few movies that he shot outdoors. And he and the cinematographer were just going nuts at each other. And the cinematographer was trying to get him to line up this shot, line up the shot. What do you want, Vincent? What do you want? What do you want? And he finally, like, for hours, made up his mind. And then they got the shot framed up, and they're on a fairground, right? And then Vincent looks through the lens, and says, "You know what? Can we move the Ferris wheel?" And the DP justifiably just walked off the set. And I think I never want that to be me. Like I always know when somebody needs a question, unless it's something that I can't answer immediately, like, I'll get right back to you. Like I always have to have the answer. So, and the most important thing is take care of yourself the night before you start shooting. I believe it or not, I get a manicure that afternoon. I get a massage, and then I take myself out for a really, really good meal because I know it could be the last one I get for a long time. And I also know that I try to get as much sleep as I possibly can. And also, I'm very good about like meditating in the morning before I shoot because I write down what my intentions are that day and I meditate, because I got to be very focused and very clear because the world is going to come at you and you don't know what's coming up. So just take care of yourself and get sleep whenever you can. You, yes?
I'm going to read a question from Brian Seeger. He says, Dear Doug, I directed for the first time on my senior film. It did not go awful. However, there were times where I felt like others seemed to take over the creation process where I need to be able to get my vision across. I was wondering if there's anything that you recommend to establish within your crew that this is your vision.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a really great question. And yeah, it could really like, you too many cooks can spoil the broth. Um, so one of the things that I learned to do on my very first movie is that I do this thing every day that I like to call the Braveheart speech. Like if you when you watch those movies that like right before they go into battle, the guy gets on the horse and he rides down the line and he gives like for God and country speech. So Lisa and Abby have heard me talk about this before, but I let them know that like here's where we are today. Here's what we need to accomplish. This is the house or the place that we're shooting. Please respect the fact that I am paying for this and that people have been considerate and kind enough. And I also say that we're all here as creatives and we should respect and honor each other as talented as artists and craftsmen and treat each other with courtesy and respect. And I said, look, I'm open to input, but you got to follow the chain of command because I have a lot to do today, and I'm the one that answers all the questions. So if you have something you'd like to say, go talk to my producer Tommy or the first AD, and if it's something that they feel like they can pass on to me, then they'll pass it up. Or if you see me at lunch and you have an idea, please say something to me, or I will turn around and say, look, anybody got an idea here? And I'm open to everything, but like this is a chain of command here, and this is how it's going to go, and this is what we're doing, and I respect you, and please respect me. And I also don't allow cell phones on my set, and I don't allow people to swear or raise their voice because it's so stressful. But in the beginning, you've got to stand up and you've got to say, this is what we're doing today, and this is how it's going to go, and this is what we need to accomplish, and we're all in this together. And I respect you, and I'm very thankful for you being here. So make them feel like they're part of it, but don't give them the leeway to get on top of it. Does that make sense?
Yes. Okay, we have another question and I haven't had this student, so please forgive me if I pronounce your last name incorrectly. Taj.
Kokai.
Thank you. Okay, Taj.
Taj can probably read his own question, right?
Okay.
He's right there.
Unmute. Hi. Are you on a headset? Because I can't hear you.
Well, if it sounds not, I can read it.
Okay, Taj says, hey, Doug, I'm in Professor Jusu's directing class, and because of COVID-19, my film got pushed back to next semester. So I'm taking this time to gather funding for my film. As a Black director, what is your advice on pitching film to potential investors?
Well, so I'm curious to how can I put this? So as a Black director, that comes up if you're talking to, especially if you're pitching to Black people. It depends. Like, does that have any basis on the story? Does your being Black have an impact on the characters or the story? And if it does, then what's your secret power? Like, what's the story that you're trying to tell, and why is it that your being Black is the key to telling this story? And you try to find what makes you unique and special, and what, more importantly, what makes this story unique and special that people want to hear. That why should they invest? And for the most part, you're probably getting, like I was getting, people to invest in you more so than the story. I mean, like when I did my first movie is called Hot Guys with Guns, and it's an interracial buddy picture, and nobody had ever done a picture quite like this, so it was really easy. But I also learned how to pitch it. You know what I mean? I found out, you talk to people and you see what people respond to. Like you try different pitches, try different words, and when somebody gets really lit up about something, then you write that down, and that becomes part of the pitch. You know what I mean? And if you're trying to get somebody to believe in you as a filmmaker, then that means you have to come at this with a lot of passion and a lot of understanding, and know how you're going to tell the story and what does it look like. I mean, I know that people respond really well when they can see something. So doing a lookbook or a Pinterest page which is what I do, or create a song list. And I go in there and I have a lot of visuals, and I have I do a little show and tell for them to understand. And a lot of times I will shoot a scene or two, and so that they have an understanding of what it is I'm trying to go for, and then I'll explain, like, it's like this movie or it's like that movie, and this is the light that we're going to use, and this is the way it's going to be. But as a filmmaker, you know, I think having a voice and having a unique voice is transcends what color you are. However, that being said, me being a gay Black filmmaker is something that I've had to use to my advantage. I mean, if I hadn't been on Noah's Ark, a lot of people wouldn't have known who I was, even though I had a career that was 20 years older than Noah's Ark. You know what I mean? But it gave me a platform. And then I decided to, and then I get told that, there are not a lot of gay Black directors. Well, there are, but, that's another conversation. Um, but I had to figure out, like, okay, so what worked for me? Like, what was it about me that people would invest in? And what people really invested in was the passion.
Okay. I think you brought up a really good point that I want.
Hey, Taj, I can see you. I saw him. Okay.
You brought up a really good point, Doug, that I'd like to emphasize here, which is while you're doing your pitch, you notice what words or what you're talking about that lights people's eyes up. And I think that's tremendously important. We talk, and this is maybe a film school thing too. We kind of say, like, get your pitch together and everything else. But if you're in the room and you see that people are glazing out over one part, but seem to have caught the hook on another, I would say, and I will pose this as a question, would you shift your pitch to
Absolutely.
go for the gold?
Yeah. If it's not working, don't use it. If it's not working, even if you see, here's the thing about that directors have to understand, and writers, and even actors. If the thing you want so much isn't landing with somebody, drop it. You can always pick it up later with something else. Like, people ask me about, like, if if I'm writing something, and when you write, you have to cut whole scenes. You can cut dialogues, cut characters. And I just make a work file, and anything I cut, I just move it over to another file, and I'm like, that'll be, maybe I'll come back to that, maybe it'll go someplace else. But if it's not working, this is an art form that relies on two people, the creator and the receiver. And if it's not being received, then you're not doing your job. You know what I mean? And especially, like, when I get a note, if you can you'll learn a lot about other people by the notes that they give you. But if I get the same note 3 times, then I make the change, because it's not just me being obstinate about something or feeling like I just want to sit and defend it. No, change it. change it. Yeah, if it's not working, change it. I mean, From Zero to I Love You wasn't the original title. That was Welcome Sinners was the original title, and I started getting pushback from distributors who were like, the title, the word sinner, and a story about gay people, maybe not so much. Trigger, blah 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 blah. And I was like, okay, I'm fine. I was like, and I had that title for 20 years. I even wrote a novel. I mean, From Zero to I Love You was originally a novel called Welcome Sinners. So I've been pushing that title for 20 years. I've been posters. There's a song in the movie that was written for the movie when it was called Welcome Sinners that would made a whole lot more sense if the movie was called that still. But you know what? If it's not working, if something isn't working, you have to change, and you have to change it on a dime. You have to see like this is working. It's like picking somebody up. You know what I mean? Like getting laid and getting a movie funded are very similar. Like imagine you're in a bar. No, I'm not. I'm not kidding, Lisa. So you're in a bar and your intention is to
I'm
leave
laughing
dinner
because
with this
it's
person,
true.
right? Yeah. All right. So your intention is to leave. Oh, I'm sorry, Kyle. Um, then the point is, if your approach isn't working, you got to change your approach.
Excellent. I got to give you props on that one. That's really good. I'm also going to say, I think, especially now that you're in New Orleans, Welcome Sinners. I think you can use that title, and it's got to be something set in New Orleans.
Okay.
I
All right.
feel it.
Which is really funny because I passed a church a couple of weeks ago that was, so my grandfather had a church, and outside of his church in Brooklyn was one of those little blackboards with the little tiny white letters on them, and it said "Welcome Sinners," and that's where I got the title from. And I actually saw that board here in New Orleans. So I'll bring it back.
Well, and it's a Catholic town, so I mean, the
Well,
Catholic
it's a church town.
survives on sinners.
Yeah. Oh
That's
yeah.
their
There's Our Lady of this and the Holy Name of Jesus that and all kinds of stuff here.
right.
Yeah, crucifixes are everywhere. But then again, so is voodoo. So was there another question from one of the students?
Um, Doug, this is Deborah. I met you. I didn't put it on the
I
chat.
remember.
Yes, how are you?
Good.
Good. I am African American and older and a woman, so I'm not caught up into all of those three, I guess, things that give people pause. Why do you start off into something at this age and you're a woman and all of that good stuff? What I heard you loud and clear when you said talk the actor's language. And what gives me pause is I haven't acted. I've written. I grew up in the church writing scripts and plays, and I love the fact that I want to direct more documentaries. But I don't know how to talk the language of an actor. I put the cart before the horse. I went to Mississippi, and I've been there 3 times. I'm doing this doc on my mother. She's 97 years old, and grew up during the sharecropping era. So I had casting calls, and I had part of my script, but I didn't know what I was doing. So I wasn't comfortable because I guess, like you said, you got to talk the language. So how do you get that confidence, or what would you suggest?
Well, there are two things. Well, you can learn by watching and you can learn by doing. And I suggest both. So I highly recommend Uta Hagen, who's probably one of the greatest acting teachers of all time, has a couple of books, and one of them is called The Respect for Acting. And I highly recommend every direct. I mean, there are a couple things that, this goes back to one of Lisa's earlier questions, and it's like there's a book. There are 2 books called My First Movie, which you should definitely read, and it's very famous film directors talking about their very first experience directing. Even Martin Scorsese's in it, and people like Mike Figgis. And then get yourself a book on acting. Like there's Stanislavski on like An Actor Prepares, and also like Uta Hagen's books are they're like, I don't know, like they're like not acting for dummies, but it's sort of like, oh my, it's like the Rosetta Stone for understanding, because she really explains things for like first time actors. And the other thing you could possibly do is take a couple scenes from your piece, because it sounds like, Deborah, that you're going to have some reenactments, which is why you
Yes.
were actors, right? So what I would do is I would take those to an acting coach, if you can find one, and I'm happy to work with you, and you play one of the parts and let somebody else direct you,
Sure.
so that you understand what it is that you got to go through, or what you want them to go through. Do you know what I mean? So it's like you do the rehearsal. You play the part and see what you could do, and work with and you don't have to do it with the actors that you're working with. You could take it, get somebody outside of your sphere to see if they can get you to the place that you want to be able to get to the actors, and see what works when somebody talks to you.
Sure.
And then, but I would also, but I really cannot stress, get a book, get a couple of books.
Okay.
You
Great.
know what I mean? But there's some really, really great books out there.
Thank you.
So you always hear or you see those things traveling around in LA, especially of like verbs to use, what things not to say. Do you think that those apply, or do you want to be told how to feel or what to do as an actor? And then are you consistent with that as a director, or do you find yourself defaulting to just do this or just do that?
Well, it depends on how much I like the director. I'm sorry. Sometimes it's like, what do you want? Okay. And then I go do it. And do you know what I mean? Sometimes if you realize that like we're clashing like this, I always defer to what the director wants to do. Like my will as an actor is subjective to that of the directors and the writers, because in the end, what they want is to have their vision realized. And my job is to realize that vision, not to superimpose my vision on top of that. And that can be very miserable sometimes, because you have a completely different idea. Like when I was on Noah's Ark, Patrick and I had a really deep conversation early into shooting, because I was in a completely different TV show. You know what I mean? And I said, "Oh, why didn't you tell me we were doing a situation comedy?" And he's like, "We're not." But I'm like, "Patrick, that's what it feels like." You know what I mean? And I was going for depth. I was going for like I gave that character a drinking problem. Like if you really watch, you'll see that I get progressively drunk in different scenes, and I always have a drink in my hand. And that was a little thing for me, because I needed to do that, and it went under the radar. But you know what I mean? Like, but they had a completely different way of seeing it. I'm like, oh, okay, how can I work in this? And as a director, one of the reasons why I like rehearsing is that like I don't tell them what to think or what to feel, but I say like, let's read it. Do you have any questions? And sometimes I'll give them like, okay, what's this kind of music? I'm like, okay, it's more like jazz, so we're going to be a little bit more improvisational for it, and like, or then I'll explain the punctuation. But I let them do what they do. You know what I mean? And I try to get out of the way and let them. But if I feel like they're way, way off, like I had an actor who I realized what the problem was the very last day we were shooting, because I kept trying to get him to play it in a certain way, and I kept trying to feed him different adjectives and different feelings, and he wouldn't do it, and I kind of had to sing it to him and get him to sing it back to me, and it wasn't really as authentic as I wanted to be. And the reason why I found out was he said something that clued me in onto where he was. He's like, well, don't you want this guy to be liked? And I thought, oh, that explains your entire career choice, because you want to be liked in everything that you do, and sometimes you're playing a fucking redneck. You're playing a redneck. You know what I mean? Like some people are gonna, like you're playing a bro, dude. Like you're not supposed to be. You're a real whole person, but It's not just like you don't have to be likable all the time. So I realize that sometimes an actor will come at you with things where you realize, oh wow, that explains everything you've ever done, and I'm going to have to figure out a workaround.
That's interesting. Do you think you trust your actors more because of your background?
Yeah, I do. I think
You
I
give
have
them
to,
more
because
leeway?
yeah, the thing is, I hire trained actors. Like, I've been very fortunate enough to have always been in class, and I always have a pool of people that I know. I know their work, or I've worked with them, and I've been in the trenches with them, and I've been very lucky to hire people. The other thing is, if you're working with somebody you don't know, ask around. Because the thing that a lot of actors, and I tell this all the time, is like, okay, so when you're working on a TV show, people want to make sure that you got to bring what you do in the audition is pretty much what you're going to do on camera, because like you bring it, it's good, that's what they want, you slot that in, you shoot 2 takes, and then you're out for the day. You know what I mean? But on a film and on a play, you'll find that actors get not just auditioned, but they get interviewed. And the reason being is because the director and the producer want to know, can I be with this person for 4 months? You know what I mean? Is this somebody who's going to be a problem on the set? Like, you can lose your attitude and your reputation can destroy your career, both as an actor and a director. Like, I know there are directors I wouldn't work with again, ever, because they're just mean and they don't know what they want. They cause a lot of drama and strife on the set. And I'm like, no, that's not what I want to be. But I've also, like, I've had to, like, the phone thing came up with me because I was directing my first feature, was super, super stressful. And I had an actor who would pull out his phone, one of the leads would out his phone between takes and start playing Words with Friends. And I would give him direction between takes, and he would be down on his phone like this, going, sure, okay. And it was driving me nuts. So I rolled the camera. I didn't cut when I didn't cut. I didn't really cut. The camera crew knew I was shooting this actor, and I gave him direction. And he was down on his phone. He was like, okay, whatever. And then I said, come here. And I took him to the monitor, and I said, roll that last bit back. And I showed him what he looked like when I'm trying to work with him. And he said, oh my God. I said, yeah, try to direct through that face for a week. You know what I mean? Like, you're not, like, so who you are and how you are is going to be the basis of your whole career. You know what I mean? Like, your reputation is everything. And so when I'm working with somebody I don't know, I ask around. I'm like, what kind of person is this? I mean, I've had big stars that I wanted to work with, and people are like, no, do not do that. You will make yourself very unhappy. And it's too hard to be unhappy.
And did you trust that advice?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I've never worked with an actor. I mean, there is somebody who I've worked with a couple times who acted up on the set one day, on a really important day, and I'll never work with that person again. And I've told people exactly what happened and how unprofessional it was. And, your work gets around. You are who how you show up and how you respect and treat others is exactly the kind of thing that's going to keep you in this business. And I've been
Indeed.
here almost 50 years, so.
Well, this business, I mean, now there's internet jobs posted, but when you and I were coming up, it was all word of mouth. And that's how you had to get jobs is
That's still how I get most of my work, believe it or not,
Yeah.
because people just call me and like, hey, are you, like, somebody told me to call you, are you available? Or like, hey, my friend, you're friends with a friend of mine, and he said you'd be really great at this. Would you want this part? Do you know what I mean? Like, I got Noah's Ark based on having known Patrick, because I was a recast. I wasn't the original actor that they had in that part. Although I auditioned for the show, I didn't get it. But he had enough faith in me to like bring me back in. You cannot understand. Like, it is a cooperative business, and you cannot. I can't stress how unpleasant it is to work with divas.
I'm with
Just,
you on that
yeah,
one.
it's completely unpleasant.
Yeah. Okay, we have a question from Holden Connor from my film lab class.
I remember Holden.
Holden says, mine is a bit of a general question. In the film industry, how do you get a good start? You can't just walk in and apply for the job you want. So what job did you have that made you stand out and move up the ranks?
Um, well, being a bit of a bright boy at the time. So I got. Wow, that's crazy. I mean, hold on, that's a really great question, but it's a little convoluted. And everybody's, once you get a toehold in, just be the best possibly can. So on this film, here's how I got my first movie as a crew person. So I was working at Channel 20 in Washington, D.C., and I was on the crew. And I don't know does Channel 20 still exist? Okay. And they used to do a lot of public programming. And I was on the floor crew. And this girl that I was really, really friendly with went in for a job interview on a feature film called Good to Go. And they were looking for set people. And she said, I told them about you, you should go in. And I went in and I had a lot more experience than she did. And unfortunately, they gave me her job. And that was so hard. That was so hard. But I made myself freaking indispensable. You know what I mean? I went from like standby assistant set dresser to being allowed to dress whole sets myself because I was everywhere the camera was, and I was asking questions. And when somebody needed something, I went and got it. And then I made friends with the Carol, the woman that was the production manager, and the locations manager. And I went to every department, and I knew the DP and the cinematographers, and I was everywhere all the time trying to be helpful and asking questions when I was allowed. And from there, people remembered me, and then they hired somebody, a producer hired me on the next thing I did was a Michael Mann movie called Manhunter, which they remade as Red Dragon like 20 years later. Um, and people remembered me from that, and I got another job. And again, it's word of mouth. So I just tried to be as helpful as I possibly can wherever I am. And people will stake their they're spending their currency on you when they recommend you for another job. So you not only have to know people, but you have to really know how to show up and do the best job, because you're not only responsible for your reputation, you're responsible for the reputation of the person behind you. So, be not in the way, but be in.
Boss.
Sorry?
Your work ethic and reputation affects the way your boss is viewed as well.
Right, as well. Exactly. I mean, you want to somebody told me years ago that my job was to make a room better for having been there. You know what I mean? And so that comes with every set, every room I walk into. I have to make it better. Like, what can I do? Can I just pick up some trash? Can I straighten the chairs? Do you need somebody to run and get you a cup of coffee? I'll do it. You know what I mean? Like, don't be afraid. And I've seen big stars do that. For a long time, Sprint had this guy who was in a black trench coat. And, like, he was the Sprint guy for years. He was making tons of money. I'm sorry, I swear a lot. So, like, me just biting down on curse words is, like, really hard. Um, and I was doing a commercial as an extra in LA, and it was this guy's birthday, and we were running 2 hours over, and he was having plans, and they bought everybody pizza. And that guy stayed and cleaned up. I mean, this guy was making like $1 million a year being the Sprint spokesperson, and he stayed and he folded, he condensed pizza boxes and he emptied trash, and he was super helpful on the set. And I look for those people. You know what I mean? Like, if I look for the guy who's going to be like Johnny on the spot all the time, and then I'll, like, when I see somebody, and I've got friends like that. I've got like 3 or 4 guys that go from movie to movie with me because I see how they are and what their work ethic is, and how, like, yeah, yes sir, what do you need? What can we do? And I'm going to bring them along, and then I'll give them more responsibility. There's a guy in From Zero to I Love You who, like, you see him like 5 times. He's a redheaded guy. He's got a beard, and if you notice, the movie took so long to shoot, like, his hair grows out, his beard grows out. And he's a friend of mine who came on as a PA, and then I knew he could act, so I gave him a couple of lines, and then he became our transportation captain. You know what I mean? And I know he's going to, like, I'm going to do a feature here, and he's going to be my first AD, because I know I saw what he could do as just a PA, and then, like, freaking moved him up.
Yeah. I mean, to summarize it all, what you said and what I say too many times, you have to do a better job than anybody else around there, including your boss.
Right. And you know why? Because you're expendable.
Yeah, indeed. Anyone on the call want to ask a question? Any of the students out there?
I have a question. So as a film student, sometimes the most accessible actors we have as filmmakers are the neighboring students in the theater department who have a lot of theater experience, but not a lot of filmmaking experience from an actor's perspective. As someone who's directed and acted in both film and theater, what advice or guidance or help could we give them to make their transition from theater to short films as easy as possible?
Well, first of all, hi, Nathan. Thanks for the question. A couple things. One, if you can, go sit in on their acting class and watch them work, or make sure that or get them to tape an audition for you, or audition for you in front of a camera. Second, film and TV acting is so different from stage because of the camera, because of the size, because of the amount of voice and that you need for a part. So one of the things that I would highly recommend, especially if it's the first time that they're acting, is you spend some time, even if you just record them on your phone, take them through a scene or a monologue and show them like, okay, you don't need to move so much here. When we're in a close-up, you need to keep your head kind of steady. The wider the shot, the more you can move. You can actually change you don't have to yell, like you're not trying to hit the back of a 1,200 seat auditorium. You can actually make it very personal. But if you've got a cell phone, you've got a film studio right there. So I would take them somewhere, and if you can rehearse them on camera and show them what they look like, so that they're aware of what they are. Because an unaware actor is the worst. You know what I mean? Like somebody who doesn't know what they look like. Like I know that like I really should be, if I were really doing this right, like I'd be sitting with the light more here. Do you know what I mean? Like I know as an actor where my light is. I know how hot I can be. You know what I mean? So any awareness you can help give the actor to what the medium is. It's like if you're working on a stage, they would know the parameters of the stage. You can't walk 18 feet on a 16-foot stage. Do you know what I mean? And if you're going to turn your back, you need to project this way. Do you know what I mean? Like, so help them understand the stage they're going to be working on, and a lot of it is 16 by 9. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you so much.
All right.
That's a good question.
Such a great point that you made, and it goes back to that point for the guy who was, playing words with friends while you were trying to talk to him. Like people, I mean, certainly actors generally, but also people tend to be unaware of how they appear to other people because we live inside our bodies and don't get that look that often. So it seems like such a helpful way to help people perceive how they're working, how they are seen by others, but also how they are working with others.
Well, that's true. I mean, one of the big lessons I got was I saw a still photograph of me on a set on the set of my very first film that I worked on, and I was in the background, and the director and the producers were all in the front, and I was standing there like, I was just looking like, and I looked so mean, and I just thought, oh my god. What it was is I was looking around the set because it was a set that I had been allowed to decorate by myself, and the entire crew was there. And I was just looking around to see what were any was there anything out of place or something that I hadn't filled in or something that wasn't there. But the look of concentration on my face looks angry. Like when I concentrate, I look really mean, and the older I get, the meaner it looks. I have to really be aware, because that can stop somebody from approaching me to ask me something or tell me something. So I have to watch myself as a writer, as a director, as an actor. I'm constantly looking at myself to say, oh, like, what's on my face right now? What am I picking up? And you'll know sometimes you're like, well, why is that? Like, why do people like, well, what's on your face? Change your face, see what's going on. And as a director, I think it's pretty helpful to set up a camera and watch. Like sometimes I will do this. I will set up my phone in the corner of the kitchen, and then I'll just cook, and then I'll play it back, and I'll sit on the porch and swing and just have a cigarette, and I'll watch myself. I'll watch the playback, so I know so I was completely out of my light there. Like, so this is what it looks like when I do this, or like, oh my god, shoot yourself walking. You know what I mean? Like, shoot yourself walking, and you'll learn a lot about you. And because we all have cameras now, there's no excuse. And I'm not just talking about a selfie. I'm talking about put it down like a film camera, put it across the room, and just watch yourself do things. Then how would you do it differently? Practice on yourself.
Such a good point. And, the furrowed brow from a intent of officiousness and being diligent and making sure that everything's thorough. It's interesting how that translates into something negative when clearly your intent was very positive.
Oh yeah, I was just trying to do the best job I could, but like, like I just try to like make a smile out of my face.
Right.
So hard. It's so hard. Again, I just want to say thank you for everybody who's on this call. I know that this is a really weird situation, and I would much rather have been there in person. And I'm really looking forward to coming, hopefully in the fall, and shooting that short because like that was me. That was like something I really. How do you decide when cutting? Okay, that went away too fast. There was another question.
That's a good question, though.
Read it, Lisa, because I only saw a little tiny bit of it.
Okay. How do you decide when cutting between a close-up and a wider shot during a scene containing dialogue between characters? Oh, I think the question might be, how do you decide where to cut between a close-up and a wide during a scene with a lot of dialogue between multiple characters?
Well, it depends on, okay, so how tense is the scene? You know what I mean? And like, first of all, did you get coverage? I hope you got coverage. It's not a one-off.
Lance, do you want to elaborate on that question? I don't know, Lance.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, like, when there's like dialogue between characters, how do you jump between like a close-up of them and then like a wider shot of like both of them in the shot, if it's like a conversation?
It depends on it depends on how you want to establish the relationship. You know what I mean? Like a lot of it, like if you enter a shot with okay, so here's a scene that I use all the time because I always ask myself that question. So Lance, do you know the movie Skyfall?
Yes.
Okay, probably the best James Bond movie. So at the beginning of the movie, when they introduce Ray Fiennes as the new head of MI6, he has a scene with Judi Dench. And if you watch that scene, that to me is probably the most genius scene about cutting between single shots and double shots and two shots. Because what it is that like what's the relationship you're trying to set up? Are they like, if you notice that they'll be sitting face to face like this, so they're already in an adversarial position, and then who's making a point and who's making a point, and then do they cut back and forth like it's a tennis match? And sometimes you'll notice that sometimes it's more important to hold on a second. Are you taking the car? Yeah, sure. All right. My roommate's taking the car. Welcome to our home. So
Don't forget the mask.
wear a mask. He's laughing in the hallway. So what is it you want to do? And sometimes if you look at a lot of older movies, you'll notice that a lot of times big stars want to be the listener, not the talker. Like if you look at John Wayne movies, John Wayne and not Cary Grant, but Gary Cooper were and Steve McQueen were famous for going through movies and like deleting lines and lines of their dialogue because they want the camera on them when they are listening, because they are then the audience surrogate. You know what I mean? So if it's something you want the audience to feel, you'll look at the people. You'll cut to the person who's listening and let the dialogue play under. Do you understand what I mean, Lance?
Yeah.
All right. So if you want to, sometimes if they're doing a lot of action or something, then you want to be on a wider shot. If people are doing something that's like where like there's a lot going on in the frame, or they're in a kitchen or moving papers around, you're going to stay on a wider shot until something really is important for like it's the gotcha moment. Then you probably cut to a close up. You know what I mean? Or if you want to, or if it's a moment where you feel like this is something that you either want to feel like you're eavesdropping on, then you cut to an over the shoulder where you can see a little bit of the character who's back to the camera. is there. It just depends on what's the tone that you're trying to set up. I mean, like you can sit on a 2-shot forever, and then when it's the gotcha moment, you listen to, then you cut to the person who's saying the line, and then cut to the person who's receiving the line. Like, watch those scenes a lot. I watch that a lot because that's the scariest thing for me. Luckily, I have an editor named Christo, who's a freaking genius at discovering those moments. And what's great about Christo is that I never give him camera notes. He can tell by my scenes how it should go, but he's a genius at finding the moments that aren't scripted and adding those in. Like Christo, like the great thing is to find those moments where somebody's reacting to something that is being said, but not to them. You know what I mean? Like somebody overhearing. Lisa, do you remember when they go to Carla's house for Palm Springs Vacation in the movie? Lance, I don't know if you saw the movie or not, from Zero to I Love You. But do you remember they're all around the dining room table and they're talking, and then there's the one character who's the stunt guy, and there are all these moments that are happening where Carla is listening and overhearing things that I didn't put in there, but that's just the camera was on her when we were shooting the dialogue, and Christo, the editor, found those moments and placed them where they would be the most impactful.
I was noticing Christo's editing a lot last night, especially with all of the dialogue and so many characters. Yeah, Christo did an amazing job.
Yeah, we had one scene. There's one scene in the movie when there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 7 people around the dining room table talking.
Yeah.
And he cut it like a genius.
Yeah.
Lance, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
I also have a question. I'm Holden. We met before, and my question would be: everyone knows that directors like to work with the same actors once they find their person that they enjoy working with. Like that's why Michael Keaton's Batman, because he was in Beetlejuice, and whenever I make a short film, I always go to my best friend because I always know he's available and we like working together. But my problem is he's going to be in like everything I've made now. So like, anytime I make something, he's always going to be the lead. So like,
hey, Orson Welles did that with Joseph Cotton. You know what I mean? So like I completely want my own film company of actors. I mean, like you'll notice if you watch my 2 films, every actor that's in one film is in the other one. I'm sorry, Holden. I cut you off, please.
oh, it's okay. But my question would be like at our level that we're at right now, we're sort of like just getting out of college and we're still making as many shorts as we can to get noticed. How do you recommend we try to find actors who, really we can't pay them because we're students?
Well, you know what you can do is you can feed them. So when you're working on student films and when you're working for a super ultra low budget, you have to have good food. You have to have good food. And craft service is everything because people will work for food. Like you'll see things like that are especially beginning actors will find, like if I don't know if you guys have, do you know what Backstage West is? Or Dramalog? There's a magazine, it's online. There's a New York version and an LA version. And you'll see where it hosts auditions and it'll say, copy, credit, and meals provided. Meaning the actor will get a copy of their scenes or the whole movie. They'll get a credit, which is something they can put on their resume, and they're going to get fed. So that's one thing. But you also have to really spend some time. You have to be willing to non-compromise. Like we went through that when we were trying to cast the short. Like it was like I was not finding what I wanted in LA. So I mean in DC. And I had to reach out and like try to figure out what was going to make it work to get the best point, because in the end it's your product. I mean, like nobody wants a half-assed car, you know what I mean, or like a half-built house, or like it's okay, like it's okay, it's not going to get you hired. You know what I mean? Like I never want people to look at any of my things. I'd rather have them hate it outright and passionately so than like, it's all right, it's fine. Oh my God, it's the worst.
Yeah.
It's the worst. So whatever you have to do to find somebody and like just talk them, see what you can do. Like, You know, I've got a friend who actually like cleaned the house of an actor in order to get the actor to work for him. You know?
Wow.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Somebody else wrote a question that I
Yeah,
want.
we have a written question from Brian McDonald. Hey, Doug, because, wait, is this the one I already read? No. Hey, Doug, because of the COVID pandemic, I've been playing around with screenwriting for the first time, and in parentheses, not my strong suit or concentration. Whenever I go to start writing, I have a hard time selecting which idea to start with. Do you have a method for selecting an idea, or do you just pick one at random and go with it?
Well, whatever. Okay, so I use a lot of similes and metaphors. It's like food. You know, when you get a plate of food, you got a lot of stuff on the plate, but what's the thing you really want to eat first? Sometimes it's the French fries. You know what I mean? So I try to pick the thing that I'm the most energized by and go with that. Like so I have like 5 different ideas going around in my head right now, and the thing that is that really tickled me is the one that I have this idea. I think I told it to Lisa. I told you about Third Slave from the Left, and did I tell you about Third Slave from the Left? Okay, so
No.
anyway, you can't use that. You know, nobody's using that. But I have this idea, and every time I say it, it makes me laugh. And so I try to sit down and I just sort of giggle along with that one, and I write outlines first. I write treatments. I don't just sit down and write a story cold. I can't do that. I probably could. I just don't like to because I like to know where I'm going, and it's all there. I just have to be willing and patient to discover it. So I look for the thing that is the most interesting to me, and even if it's a scene, like I have this idea. I have this idea for a sci-fi series or a movie or something with something I've never seen before, and it's called Crown and Shield, which is the name of the ship. And I just wrote a scene, and it's a scene between a father who's the ship's captain who finds out that who's a spaceship captain in a star fleet kind of situation, and he finds out that his son is now been posted to his own ship, and his son and he don't have the greatest relationship because he left his son's mother for a man, and so there's like you know, so I don't know where that's going, but I just couldn't not write that scene that day, so I'm trying to work backwards off of that. So whatever gets in your head that day, there's no wrong writing, there's no bad day to write. Any day that you sit down and you do at least a page, you're doing something. You know, that's a day more than you had the day before.
Mira Kelly has asked, do you submit these ideas somewhere or just make all your own work?
I do a little bit of both. I mean, I got tired of waiting for Hollywood to discover me, so I decided to make my own movies. And Lisa knows what that's like. You wanna just get it done. You know what I mean? Like I spent 20 years trying to make From Zero to I Love You. Like I literally Jodie Foster's company had it. Whoopi Goldberg's company had it. Um, at one time, it was going to be, believe it or not, it was going to be me and Dennis Quaid as the leads. And you know, after a while, I just thought, you know what, I just got to do this myself because first of all, you can submit things, but it's really hard without an agent or a manager or a lawyer. Like I have a lawyer who can at least get me read in places. You know what I mean? But most places will not take a submission because it's because they can be sued left and right. You know, like I can't tell you how many times I got my scripts mailed back to me with a nice little letter going, "Don't do this again." It has to come from a representative. So with that, I'm like, screw it. I didn't have an agent at the time, so I like got my friends together and decided, you know, like just let's shoot a short. And I shot a couple scenes, and then I said, okay, this is what I want to do, and it's going to be a much bigger movie. So that's when I went out and started doing it. But we don't have any excuses not to work. You know, even if it's not for money, it's just for the sake of the work. You keep doing the work, the money will eventually come.
Creators create. All right, anybody else want to ask a question?
Can I ask a really sort of offbeat question? Off, not exactly what you're talking about here, but I know that you directed Aretha, and I think people tend to think of directing documentaries and directing fiction films. The differences seem apparent. Can you talk about the ways that that process might be similar?
Okay. So first of all, research is similar. You got to do research. So I had like a foot of research on Aretha Franklin. I'd read books, I'd read her book, and I literally walked into the first interview with her with a stack of albums and all this research. And she was probably the most brilliant and hardest person I've ever talked to. And literally, I started to sweat, but luckily the sweat started here and rolled downward down my back. So my back was entirely wet because she was like, "No, that didn't happen that way," and she would correct me. Like it was like pages of research was wrong, and I think a lot of it was her. The research was right. She was just doing image management. Um, like I said, like hire better, get out of the way. Like if you let people do what they do, and somebody like both an artist, singer songwriter like Aretha, who knows who at that time had been doing what she did. She'd been doing the Aretha show for 50 years. I wasn't going to get in the middle of it and try to make it better. You know what I mean? The same with directing somebody like Richard Lawson in my movie. Richard's been acting since 1969. I'm not gonna like. I gave Richard the part because I knew he could do it, and whatever he did was going to be brilliant. And all I had to do was just stand there and look really smart for hiring him. You know what I mean? So I think with the real work for a documentarian, for me as a documentarian, comes in the post production, because you have to then take it and shape it. You know, I have to learn how to ask the right questions, and sometimes I ask the wrong questions, and sometimes I have to learn on my feet to what to ask and like what to get away from entirely. And then when I got it all, then I have to sift through it and go, okay, so what's the story that I want to tell here? What's the story that's going to reveal itself to me? Because documentaries are a lot like paintings to me. It's like you paint it to figure out what it is. You know what I mean? You put the pieces together and try to make some cohesion, and then like, oh wow, that really worked. And you know, I got a really nice half-hour documentary out of this, but it was really freaking awesome. I mean, and also like if you really treat somebody with respect, they'll open up completely and give you everything. Like the Aretha, so we wanted her to play, and the only way she would play for me was if I brought her piano into, if I had her piano moved from her house to the studio, to the recording studio where she liked to work and where she insisted on doing the interview. She wouldn't let me do it at her house, and she brought, and because I was willing to do that, she brought with her a garbage bag, a hefty garbage bag of photos, like out of albums and things like that. And she just started digging in and pulling these photos out and letting me shoot them and telling me stories about them. And then she sat down at the piano with me and my photographer and the sound guy, and she played for me and talked to me for half an hour. It's just me kneeling, you know, like this on the piano with Aretha Franklin, and and it wasn't because I was trying to control the whole thing. I was just willing to let the thing unfold. You know what I mean? And every once in a while, you just got to go like this. You just got to go like that. But it's the same thing. Like you let when you're working, you don't tell Picasso what kind of picture to paint. Do you know what I mean? You're going to get a Minotaur or Guernica, but it's going to be a freaking Picasso. So shut the hell up.
How long did it take to edit that?
Oh my God, 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, because it was for a program. It was for the.
Thinking years.
No. I don't have years. See, that's the thing. Because I was trained in television, I don't, I don't understand why things take so long. You know what I mean? Like because I come from TV originally, where you get the idea of like, okay, so if I had to do next week's TV show, like Chicago Fire, I would have gotten it. I would have gotten either the dailies or the premiere cut of the episode 10 days, probably within a couple of days of them shooting it. Sometimes I would get the dailies the day of, and I would then cut to an uncolor corrected, and then wait and see what was actually in the final thing, and then he'd give me the color corrected version. But like you get from the time you get an idea from the time you get the assignment, you may only have, in a big campaign, you'll get a month. In the day-to-day process, you get less than a week. Like sometimes you'll have to cut. You're cutting next week's show when they're cutting, the promo for next week's show while they're cutting next week's show. So like the idea that film moves like at such a glacial pace, I don't understand. Like we cut Hot Guys with Guns in 2.5 weeks. You know what I mean? Sit down, you do it, and you get it done, and let's move. Keep going. Let's go. I don't understand why film takes so much longer.
This is Deborah again. I have another documentary question concerning this film, concerning my mom. How I want to tell a good story on her. I have a bunch of brothers and sisters, large family, and I want to give her honor. But she came through the sharecropping era, as I said before. And so in her life, I'm from her second marriage, but in her lifetime, she's dealt with post-traumatic stress, with slavery of hanging of some loved ones, violence where in her first marriage, she's seen her husband and her 2 kids get shot in front of her, and just a host of different issues. So my challenge with the story, how do you narrow it down? What do you really, and this is a question to you, how would I narrow it down? What do I want the viewer to see? What do I want the viewer to know about my mom? Because she's a pretty awesome person.
Well, that sounds, the 2 things that I want to address here. One, have you ever read a book called Jubilee?
I haven't.
Do you know it?
I have not read it.
All right. If you can, read Jubilee. And the other thing is watch The Prime of Miss Jane Pittman.
Yes, I'm a
You might have seen like when we were both kids, because I think we're probably around the same age.
Yeah.
But take a look at that. Because the thing, like what's the, like if you're thinking about the pitch, it's, it's one woman's resolve and your mother's a survivor, number one.
Yes.
So it's definitely a story of a woman who survived all of this, and survived it to go on to do what? Like how? What's the button on the pitch? I mean, like, you want to know that your mother, she was the witness of all of this. You know what I mean? She bore witness to this, and she survived it, and then what? You know what I mean? Like, how did it go on? What's the feel good at the end of the story that you're trying to get? So I think once you understand what it is that it will help you ask the right questions during the documentary. And also in terms of asking those questions, especially with somebody who's dealt with trauma and family members who've dealt with trauma. When I first got to LA, the first assignment that I was given was to do an ad campaign for a movie of the week that CBS did about the survivors of the sinking of a naval ship during World War II. And the ship was it's very famous because they call it the Night of the Sharks. The ship went down with almost everybody going into the water. Almost nobody died, but like 500 people were eaten by sharks in the water that night. And I was interviewing something like 20 of the survivors. And I had to be very, very, very careful about the questions I asked because I was triggering them. I mean, like, these guys were like in their 60s and 70s, and some of them were bursting into tears because the PTSD of having been a 20-something at night in the water in the Pacific, where people are literally being picked off around you. I mean, that never went away. Right. You understand what I mean, Deborah?
I do.
So I still had to get the story out, but I had to be very gentle in the way that I extracted it.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So you have to be you have to give people time, but you want them to, part of your job is to do the unpleasant thing and make them go through the feelings again.
Well, I don't want to take up all the time, but I do have another question, but I will comment, and you're spot on, because that's what the brothers and sisters were concerned about. And I started interviewing her about 3 or 4 years ago, and now she has a touch of dementia. So I'm glad that I have footage of interviews on her. The other, I'm here, I live in Fredericksburg, but it's not too far from Fairfax, where I'm going to school at George Mason. But she reigned from Mississippi. So when I went initially, I interviewed people in Mississippi, and I got some footage of historical churches, blah, 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 in Mississippi, Clarksdale. But I want to do it for my senior thesis here at George Mason. So what would you suggest? I want to utilize some of the students here because it's going to be a logistical probably nightmare, but I want to stay to being authentic to.
Well, I'm sorry, can I jump in?
Yeah, sure, sure.
All right, Deborah, photos. You know, newspaper clippings, family photos, anything to make it real and tangible. Because I mean, I love documentaries, and I think anytime, I mean, it's one thing to watch the reimagining of something, but it's another when you can see something that was actually from that time.
And
So
you can
any
see
photos,
the pain
newspaper
in their
clipping.
eyes.
Sorry.
You can see the pain in their eyes in the photos. There's an authenticity there.
Yeah. And it makes them real and tangible. Like if you see a family photo of a black family from the 1920s outside of a sharecropper's cabin, you like, that's the real deal. This is what they are. Then you zoom in. You do, what do they call that? What is it? It's a Ken Burns, where they zoom in on the photo.
Right.
Like, I mean, have you watched many documentaries?
Yes, a lot.
Have you ever seen
You're
the
right,
kid
but
stays in the
Professor
picture?
Fuchs. Yes, I do. I do.
Have you seen The Kid Stays in the Picture, which is the Robert Evans documentary?
Yes.
Okay, like that to me is a genius documentary. Like the way they use photos, and they talked about his house, and he talked about his house, but you never see him in the house, but you just see the house itself. Like if there's any way to like, the other thing is you can get people. Like, do you still have family in Mississippi or know anybody in Mississippi?
I do. I have cousins and friends.
Get them to walk around with their cell phone cameras and take pictures or videos and have them uploaded to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
That makes sense?
It does. It makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Good luck with this. I can't wait to see it. You know, like you read that script about my mother, like you know, the one that we were supposed to do, right? Well, you know, I want to turn that into a full-length feature. When I talk about the stuff, like my mother was, she was a, you know, during World War II, she was in Tennessee, and she was the foreman at an ammunition plant. And she was a marks. She and my dad both had sharpshooting medals from World War II. And my mother, I found out the hard way, was a jiu-jitsu champion because she'd been trained. She'd been trained at the factory. You know, she had 2 marriages I didn't even know about. You know what I mean? Like, you know, like there's a whole lot of doors that I want to explore. So I really like I think one of the things that's really underserved is not only the stories about women in this country, but the stories of Black women in this country, especially in the mid to late 20th century. Like these, like my mom was born. My May 20th would be my mom's. I don't mean to just drag this off, but like, I really want to make a point.
Like me.
My mom's birthday would be. She'd be 100 this May.
Oh man.
So when I think about the stuff that my mom lived from the 1920, like growing up, like jumping in, I mean, like she got a spanking once for jumping into a bathtub full of gin that my grandfather made during Prohibition, or my great grandfather made, and then you know she died in 2005.
Wow.
With cell phones.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I look at like the things that woman just saw.
Right. Exactly.
Lived through.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like that. Those are stories that you can't tell enough.
Exactly.
From a Black female's perspective, I think it's like there's only 2, Claudine and the prime of the life and time Miss Jane Pittman. Like that's not there's not enough stories. There's always something to tell.
Exactly. She graduated from, well, she only went to the 5th grade, but even today, in spite of her dementia, she's got a calculator in her head. She can count numbers like never before.
Right.
But the thing is, one last note, she said, who wants to hear my story? I don't know who would want to hear my story.
Me.
Thank you.
I would.
Thank you.
Who else? Who's next? What else can I talk about? Is this is this helpful at all? Like,
very helpful. And I want to highlight a learning lesson or a little teachable thing here to all of the students or everybody on the call, that you said that you have to sometimes deal with the uncomfortable or say things that are uncomfortable. And I think that I know I always say that in my producing class, because as a producer, we always have to be the boss. And sometimes, you have to make hard decisions or say hard things. But I think that's a really good point for really all aspects of our industry, and especially with directors and storytelling, that you really have to, I think, push it and view the film as the baby that needs to be protected. And if that means that the director is having to ask a question or push the creative along to make the story come out, I think that that's an uncomfortable place for many, but one that our industry in particular, we have to be comfortable with the uncomfortable.
so can I jump on this real quick, because I worked on a movie where the director got fired. I've worked on 2 films, actually, Cradle to the Grave. I worked on where they fired the entire effects crew, and what was supposed to be a 1-day shoot for me turned into 3 weeks, and a lot of it was because of the bad behavior of DMX. Like, he wouldn't, the DMX story. He wouldn't come to set. He wouldn't leave his trailer. He wouldn't stop getting high. He wouldn't learn his lines. So DMX put a freaking roof on my mother's house because like, literally, I was there. It got so bad that I had to move to Long Beach. And then the Joel Silver, who was the producer, didn't like the effects the way they were happening. And we were shooting 12 cameras at a time. 12 cameras, 12-hour days. And some days we would try to shoot around, and maybe DMX would come to the set and maybe he wouldn't. The whole time, he never, ever came to set. Sometimes he would just be on location and not leave his trailer. And sometimes he would just want to stand outside, and nobody, because he was such a big draw at the time, and his name was so anchored into the movie that they let him get away with it. They went 4 months over budget because of that. And that's why DMX has never made another movie. But the other thing I wanted to say is that, like, we grew, like, I try to be as transparent and as kind as I possibly can, but you will not everybody's going to be a Doug Spearman. Like, you will work with screamers. Like, you haven't lived in Hollywood until you've worked for a screamer, and I've worked for 2 of them. You know what I mean? And not everybody is going to respect your gender identity. Not everybody is going to respect your pronouns, your gender, your ethnic background, whatever. I mean, you'll face some really nasty things out there, and especially the higher up you go, the more people. One of the reasons why I left New Orleans is or left LA is because people's entitlement is unbelievable. You get people do one thing and it goes to their head. And the worst part about all of this is fame. Fame is a very tricky, ugly drug, and people will do whatever they can to maintain that fix of fame, and it's not pretty, and it leads to some really bad behavior. And the other thing I can tell you is that something one of my acting teachers told me is that, like, whatever your bad habits are, get rid of them now before your career starts, because that stuff grows in spotlights. If you got a drinking problem or a drug issue or gambling or sex, don't handle it. I did. I got sober because cocaine and scotch were about to tank a very productive acting career for me. Like, if I hadn't gotten sober, I wouldn't be here right now. Coffee. Coffee. You've got to understand that people get really crazy. And you're lucky that you're with such, from my interaction with the teachers and the faculty at George Mason has been really amazing. And I really respect the community that you guys have built and the way that you're teaching. And it's so fantastically inclusive. It's a lot different in the real world when there's money on the table, because in the end, it's commerce and then art. You know,
In
like
the offices, the executives will throw stuff, throw chairs, throw staplers,
oh
yell
yeah,
at you. I
oh
mean,
yeah. You don't want to be like don't
ruthless.
work in an agency. Don't work in an agency. You know, like if you don't have a thick skin, do not work in the agency. If you don't have a thick skin, don't work in this business. You know what I mean? Like if you take rejection badly, you build some calluses because not everybody's going to like what you want, and not everybody's going to see it the same way, and people are going to tell you to your face. They're going to like don't Google yourself. I learned that pretty early on. You know, people will say some dumb shit to you about you, and it will. And here's the thing that writers, directors, and actors have to understand: what we do comes out of us. So there's a certain amount of personal that's attached to it, and people will say some really ugly, hurtful things. And I remember the first time I did the full cut. When the first time I saw the very first full cut of From Zero to I Love You, I saw it at night, and then the next day I couldn't get out of bed. I was crying. I was freaking out because it was so personal. Because that story's based on my life and my hopes and my dreams. It's how I see the world. It's how I deal with everything, clothing, interiors. You know, like everything is so specific to my worldview that it's so much me. You know, luckily, 99% of the feedback has been really great about the film. But you know, like it's like I was like, okay. And my editor turned to me like right after we watched it. He's like, people are gonna hate you. I'm just like, and I said, why do you say that? He said, because it's so you and you, and because I'm a romantic and I like happy endings. And one of the things I've learned is that there are two types of people in the world: people who like happy endings and people who hate happy endings. And people who hate, do you hate happy endings, Lisa?
I love
Oh,
them.
okay, good. I was just like, please, no, we'll never work together. Um, but people who don't like happy endings, like there's a reason why. And so, like, hurt people, and then they will put it on, you know, the internet.
Indeed. All right. Who else? Let's do one last question. Who would like to ask one? Or am I just going to scare somebody and
I can ask one.
All right.
Yeah. So, in this time where we're trapped alone, I can now focus on a lot of writing, but a big thing that stops me in writing is self-doubt. I'll be writing something down and I'm like, I don't know if this makes sense. I don't know if people would like this. I don't think this is good enough. So how do you get around?
Stop
Yeah.
doing that. Holden, it's not your business. Um, it's none of your business whether it's good enough. It may not be good enough for you. Like there's a very famous story about who wrote Grapes of Wrath? John
Steinbeck?
Steinbeck. So he went to Faulkner with this manuscript. He's like, hey, you know, I don't know. I wrote this thing. I don't know whether it's any good. Could you read it and tell me? And Faulkner read the first draft of Grapes of Wrath, and said, "It's freaking genius. Don't change a word." And so they printed the first version of it. There's no corrections in it. And if Faulkner had said, "You know what? I don't like it," like that could have ended up in the ash can. You know, Stephen King's first big hit was Carrie, right? The novel. He threw it in the trash because he couldn't get a publisher. He had only had one version. This is back before computers, so he was typewriting it. He wrote it on a typewriter, me editing, and he didn't. He kept getting rejected, so he threw the only copy he had away. And his wife was like taking out the trash, and she found it in the trash. She's like, "Don't do that." You know what I mean? So it's not up to us. And here's another thing, and this is going to sound pretentious as hell, but here goes. I am the lantern. I am not the light. And what I mean by that is, look, this stuff comes through me. It's not mine. I'm just the channel for it. Like, if like we use the word genius to think of somebody as really bright and smart and just super intelligent, but that's not what the word means. Genius is something that lives outside of us. That the Greeks thought of it as something that lived outside of us that came through us. It's the reason why, like, you ever notice that like certain people get like the same idea will be floating around, and suddenly like there are three different versions of like Edison and Tesla and Marconi and the other guy that both came up with radio at the same time. Like, so those ideas are all out there, and they're just my job is to just let it come through me, and I just type as fast as I can. And I don't necessarily think I'm writing. I think I'm just taking dictation. So channeling. That's one way to look at it.
But channeling going on in New Orleans.
Yeah. But I mean, and it's uncomfortable because I'm trying to judge it at the same time. So Holden, I completely understand where you're coming from. But I just like what would happen if I took my ego out of this, and definitely don't think about whether anybody likes it or not. It's not your job to, like you don't see the audience for something you haven't created yet.
Yeah.
You understand what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like you have to figure out what it is, and then like, okay, it's there, it's a thing, and once it becomes a thing, it takes on this life. And I believe that the universe will then find a place for it because it called it into being. It may not be right away. It may take years. But there's a reason why you did it or doing it.
All right. Thank you.
I don't remember how long this session is supposed to go. Cynthia, do you know?
You're muted, Cynthia.
Oh, Alexander Hammett has asked a question. So we shouldn't criticize every little thing we make. Let someone else be the judge of it? Question mark.
Well, that's a really great question. So criticizing something isn't the same as taking a good, honest look at it and seeing if it works or not. Like, but criticism implies that you're gonna like this doesn't work, that doesn't work. Like you don't want to tear yourself down as you're building something. Do you know what I mean? Like, how can it be refined? What can make it better? But I don't criticize my work. I just literally vomit it all up. And then I go back and I edit. And then I go like this works better over here, and then I'll move this around, or like you know what I mean. So don't get so caught up in working on something that you don't fit. You can criticize yourself into not finishing something, and that's not the point. The point is to finish it, is to get it all out, and then figure out what you've got, and then take a look at it and get other. And especially with the script, isn't that you have to write the script, but you have to have it read out loud because the script is meant to be read aloud. You know what I mean? It's actually the words, and so you'll know whether it works or not. The actors can say it. You understand what I mean? Like you have to, like if it's a novel, does it read well? Does it make like people keep turning the pages? Then you know that you've got something. But if it's a script, do people turn the page and does it flow out of the mouth really well? And so you'll learn something, and you have to be willing to learn throughout the entire process. Have you guys, Lisa? Have you told them about like there's the movie you write, the movie you rewrite, the movie you rewrite again, the movie you shoot, the movie you reshoot, the movie you edit, the movie you edit again. Do you know what I mean? And then there's a movie that ends up.
A little bit differently, not as gracefully. I usually say the script is dead. You now have your footage, and your movie is from there on. Right. It's always very frustrating especially with green directors, and you hear them saying, but in the script, the script is dead. You have what you shot.
The movie. Yeah.
Where do we go from there?
Really pay attention. The great thing is, like if any of you still have DVD players, which I highly recommend you keep a DVD and a Blu-ray all the time, because listen to the commentary from the director and the actors. That's one of the best, adjuncts to film school that you could possibly get. I mean, like you listen to them talk, or like, what was it? The Blue Line, the Terrence Malick movie. Like, look at Terrence Malick movies, and I'm not a big Terrence Malick fan. In fact, my favorite thing is to look at how to make Terrence Malick soup on YouTube. Watch that; it's hysterical. But Terrence Malick recut that movie completely. Like who was it? The guy that was the lead in the movie showed up to the premiere and left crying because he shot this whole movie as the lead in the film, and he was like third guy by the time Terrence recut the movie. You know what I mean? Oh yeah. The guy that won the best actor for The Pianist.
Oh, I love that guy, Adrian Brody.
Adrian Brody was the lead in that movie, and until he went to see it, and then he was like third lead. So yeah, this is
I
all
don't know
fluid.
what your Sinners Welcome story is about, but I could see Adrian Brody in a New Orleans Sinners Welcome, gritty, dirty. I'm seeing it.
We'll talk offline because I have a bunch of things I want to pitch you. So there you go. So weren't we supposed to go for an hour and a half? Because we're now on our second hour.
Yeah, we're good. Yeah, this has been fantastic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any more questions before we ring off? I just want to, since we're all here. Anybody? Screw you. You don't know what you're doing, Doug. You know.
I don't think so. Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much, Doug. We just can't thank you enough. We look forward to seeing you next semester or whenever the world changes back.
Yeah, exactly. When it flips back up.
Yeah.
All right, you guys, keep writing. Keep writing. All right, talk to you later.
Thank you so much.
Stay safe.
You too.
Bye.